I sat quietly in the corner of the glass-walled rooftop suite, watching Seattle's skyline blur through the rain-streaked windows. The Reyes family's annual gathering wasn't supposed to be about wills and inheritance, but here we were, gathered around mahogany and marble like vultures circling something already dead. My father Tomas had turned 65 last week, and apparently that milestone had triggered something in him, a need to make things official. The crystal chandelier overhead cast shimmering rays onto the expensive porcelain, but the atmosphere in this room felt like a battlefield to me. I took a sip of wine, trying to keep my gaze from drifting to my brother Leo's face across the table, where he sat with that practiced smile he'd perfected in business school. Leo looked perfectly at ease in his tailored suit, his hedge fund success radiating from every confident gesture. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Julian, my mother Cecilia said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation like a blade, you're being unusually quiet tonight. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone steady. Same as always, Mom, just listening. She exchanged a look with my father that I'd seen 1,000 times before. The look that said, what are we going to do with him? The disappointment was so familiar, I barely felt it anymore, like background noise you eventually stop hearing. The family attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and pulled out a leather portfolio. If I may have everyone's attention, he said, his voice carrying the weight of formality. Tomas has asked me to review the updated estate arrangements while the family is gathered. My stomach tightened. This wasn't how these things usually happened, but nothing about my family followed normal patterns. Leo leaned forward slightly, his interest sharpening like a predator catching a scent. The attorney began reading, his words washing over me like cold water. The family home, Leo's. The investment portfolio, Leo's. The trust fund that had been in our family for 3 generations, Leo's. My name appeared exactly once, in connection with a box of old books and my grandfather Santiago's wristwatch. Julian has always been more interested in creative pursuits, my father said, his tone suggesting those pursuits were barely above finger painting. Leo has demonstrated the kind of ambition and business acumen necessary to preserve the family legacy. Leo graciously pretended to be surprised, reaching across to squeeze my shoulder. Jules, you know I'll take care of you, he said, but I caught the hint of satisfaction in his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The room continued its polite murmur of congratulations and business talk, but I felt like I was underwater, watching it all happen from a great distance. The humiliation wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull and familiar, like an old injury that aches when it rains. I left quietly, the way I always did, carrying the small box of grandfather's things to my studio apartment. It wasn't until later that night, alone with the musty smell of old books, that I found the envelope tucked inside Santiago's worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, an envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting, and a business card for someone named Naomi Glass, attorney at law. The law office sat tucked between a vintage record shop and a small cafe in Capitol Hill, its brick facade weathered but dignified. I clutched Santiago's business card in my pocket as I climbed the narrow stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The nameplate read, Naomi Glass, attorney at law, in simple gold lettering. Naomi Glass wasn't what I expected. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 45, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back and eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. Her office smelled of old books and coffee, walls lined with legal texts, and what looked like community award certificates. Julian Reyes, she said, rising from behind a desk that had clearly seen decades of use. Your grandfather spoke of you often. He did? The words came out smaller than I intended. She smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd felt in days. Sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, stubborn as hell, but remarkable. I sat in the worn leather chair across from her desk, trying to process the surreal nature of being here. I don't understand why he left me as things separately. Why the secrecy? Because Santiago Reyes knew his family better than they knew themselves, Naomi said, opening the folder. He watched your father build a business empire on appearances, and your brother follow the same path. But you, she looked up at me, he saw something different in you. She slid a document across the desk. Julian, your grandfather has named you the sole heir to a private foundation he established 15 years ago, Project Lantern. Along with that comes operational control and a trust fund valued at $4.8 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the papers, the legal language swimming before my eyes. I don't. That can't be right. $4 million? Your grandfather was a civil engineer, but he was also a quiet investor. He bought property in neighborhoods before they gentrified, sold at the right times, and reinvested everything into community projects, housing initiatives, education programs, small business loans for immigrants and single mothers. Naomi's voice carried the weight of admiration. He never wanted credit. He just wanted to build something that mattered. I thought of Santiago, always the family eccentric, showing up to dinners in worn flannel shirts, while everyone else dressed like they were attending a board meeting. My father always said he was wasting his potential. Your father couldn't see past his own nose, Naomi said bluntly. Santiago created more lasting value than Reyes Holdings ever will. And he chose you to carry it forward because he believed you understood the difference between success and significance. She handed me another folder, this one marked confidential in red letters. There's something else. Your grandfather spent the last 2 years of his life documenting financial irregularities within your family's company. He suspected your brother Leo of misappropriating funds. My stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? Trust fund diversions, expense account fraud, charity donations that never reached their intended recipients. Your grandfather couldn't prove it conclusively before he passed, but he gathered enough evidence to warrant a serious investigation. She leaned forward. Julian, Project Lantern has been one of Reyes Holdings' largest silent investors. If Leo has been stealing from the company, he's been stealing from the very communities your grandfather was trying to help. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Bank statements, expense reports, photographs of Leo at charity galas for organizations that seemed to exist only on paper. The evidence was damning but also overwhelming. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked. Whatever your conscience tells you to do, Naomi said. Your grandfather trusted your judgment. He always said you had the strongest moral compass in the family, even if you kept it hidden. I left her office feeling like I was walking through someone else's life. $4.8 million. A foundation. Evidence of my brother's corruption. The weight of Santiago's trust pressed down on my shoulders like a winter coat I wasn't sure I deserved to wear. You look like someone who just found out Santa Claus is real but also discovered he's been embezzling from the elves, Theo said, sliding a coffee across the bookstore counter to me. I managed a weak smile. Theo Martinez had been my coworker and closest friend for 3 years, a part-time barista and full-time poet who saw through everyone's bullshit with surgical precision. His dark eyes were studying me with the intensity he usually reserved for analyzing line breaks in Neruda. Something like that, I said, taking a sip of the coffee. The familiar routine of opening Morning Glory books felt surreal after yesterday's revelations. Theo, what would you do if you found out someone in your family was stealing money meant for charity? Are we talking hypothetically, or are we talking about your douchebag brother finally getting caught? I nearly choked on my coffee. How did you? Julian, I've been watching you tiptoe around your family's drama for years. Your brother drives a car that costs more than most people's houses. Your parents live in a glass tower that screams, "We have more money than empathy," and you work at a used bookstore because you actually give a shit about things that matter. He shrugged. It doesn't take a detective to figure out which one of you might be the good guy in this story. I pulled out my phone and showed him the address Naomi had given me. Want to take a field trip? The Rainier Valley Community Center sat in a neighborhood my family would never visit, a converted warehouse with murals painted by local artists, and a playground where kids played soccer with a ball held together by duct tape. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs of graduation ceremonies, citizenship celebrations, and community garden harvests. "You must be Julian," said a man emerging from what looked like a makeshift office. He was maybe 50, with graying temples and paint under his fingernails. "I'm Silas Chen. Your grandfather spoke of you." "He did?" Santiago was here almost every week for the last 5 years of his life. Teaching kids how to build things, helping adults navigate citizenship paperwork, just listening to people's stories. Silas gestured around the space. This whole place exists because of his vision. He saw potential where others saw problems. I walked through the center with Silas, seeing computer labs where teenagers learned coding, meeting rooms where immigrant families received legal aid, art studios where kids painted murals of their dreams. Everything was modest, but vibrant, alive with purpose. Santiago always said his grandson Julian was going to carry this forward someday, Silas continued. He said you understood that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's what you elevate. Standing in that community center, watching a grandmother teach origami to a group of children while teenagers tutored younger kids in math, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about my family's money, or Leo's crimes, or even my grandfather's legacy. This was about the quiet revolution that happened when people decided to care about each other. "Silas," I said, "what would happen if the funding for this place got cut?" His face darkened. "We'd lose about 60% of our programs, the after-school tutoring, the job training, the legal aid clinic. Families would suffer." I thought about the folder in my apartment, about Leo's expense reports showing thousands spent on wine dinners while kids in this very neighborhood went to bed hungry. The cost of my silence suddenly became clear. The rooftop bar Leo chose was exactly what I expected. All glass and steel and views of Elliott Bay, the kind of place where cocktails cost more than most people's grocery budgets. I found him at a corner table, already nursing what looked like an expensive whiskey, his phone buzzing constantly with what I assumed were work calls. "Jules!" He stood to embrace me, his smile wide and practiced. "I was surprised to get your call. Family bonding time?" I sat across from him, placing the manila folder on the table between us. "We need to talk, Leo." His eyes flicked to the folder, and I caught a micro-expression of something that might have been fear before his practiced confidence slid back into place. "What's this about?" "Project Lantern, Santiago's foundation. The money you've been diverting from Reyes Holdings." I opened the folder and spread out the bank statements, the forged expense reports, the documentation of phantom charities. "I know everything." Leo's laugh was hollow. "Jules, I don't know what kind of conspiracy theories you've been reading, but—" "The Beacon Children's Foundation," I interrupted, pointing to one of the documents. "You claimed the company donated $50,000 to them last year. Except they don't exist. The address on their paperwork is a vacant lot in Tacoma." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "The Emerald Coast Vineyard. You bought it with money diverted from the company's community investment fund, then listed it as a business expense for client entertainment." I kept my voice steady, but inside I was shaking. "Leo, you've stolen over $2 million in the last 3 years alone." For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. I saw the anger, the desperation, the realization that his carefully constructed world was cracking. Then he leaned back, his smile returning like armor. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, who's going to believe you? The family disappointment who works at a bookstore and lives in a studio apartment?" He picked up his whiskey, swirling it casually. "You think Mom and Dad are going to take your word over mine? You think the board is going to listen to someone who couldn't even finish graduate school?" "Maybe not," I said, standing up, "but Naomi Glass will. And the State Attorney General will. And the IRS definitely will." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His confidence cracked again. "Julian, you don't want to start something you can't finish. You think you understand how this world works, but you're still that naive kid who believes in fairy tales about good guys winning." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the golden child my parents adored. I saw a man so terrified of being ordinary that he'd steal from children's programs to maintain his illusion of success. "Maybe I am naive," I said, pocketing the folder, "but at least I'm not a thief." I left him sitting there, his expensive whiskey growing warm, his phone buzzing with calls he suddenly didn't want to answer. Outside, Seattle's rain felt cleaner than the air in that bar. "Holy shit, Julian. This is bigger than we thought." Sienna Lynn spread documents across her kitchen table like a detective mapping a crime scene. I hadn't seen her since college, but when I'd reached out about investigating financial corruption, she'd invited me over immediately. Her investigative journalism instincts had kicked in the moment I mentioned Leo's name. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a printout of bank records. "Your brother didn't just steal from Reyes Holdings. He created an entire network of shell companies to launder the money. Pacific Northwest Development, Cascadia Investment Group, Emerald City Holdings. They're all registered to the same address, a mailbox in Bellevue." Theo whistled low from his spot on Sienna's couch, where he was cross-referencing names against public records on his laptop. "And get this, 3 of these companies are listed as major donors to local political campaigns. Your brother was using stolen charity money to buy political influence." I felt sick. The scope of Leo's deception kept expanding like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. "How much are we talking about total?" "Conservative estimate? $7.2 million over 5 years, Sienna said. "And that's just what I can track through public records. The real number is probably higher." Naomi had joined us for the evening, her legal expertise helping us navigate the labyrinth of corporate filings and tax documents. She looked up from a stack of papers, her expression grim. "Julian, I found something else. Your grandfather wasn't just suspicious, he was actively investigating. These are copies of correspondence between Santiago and various regulatory agencies." She handed me a letter dated 6 months before Santiago's death. In his careful handwriting, he documented concerns about missing funds, forged signatures, and what he called, quote, "a pattern of systematic theft disguised as business expenses." "He tried to bring this to your father's attention," Naomi continued. "Tomas dismissed it as the paranoia of an old man losing his mental faculties. The betrayal cut deeper than Leo's theft. My father had ignored Santiago's warnings, choosing to protect Leo's reputation over investigating potential crimes. The golden child could do no wrong, even when evidence suggested otherwise." "There's more," Sienna said, pulling up a news article on her laptop. "Remember the Washington Education Initiative that Reyes Holdings sponsored last year? The one that was supposed to fund computer labs in underserved schools?" I nodded. Leo had given a speech at the fundraising gala, talking about the importance of giving back to the community. According to the school district's records, they received less than 30% of the promised funding. The rest disappeared into administrative costs and quote-unquote program development fees that all trace back to your brother's shell companies. I thought about the kids at the Rainier Valley Community Center, learning to code on donated computers held together with hope and determination. Meanwhile, Leo was stealing the money meant to give them better opportunities, using it to buy vineyard estates and political access. "We have enough evidence to destroy him," I said, staring at the mountain of documentation. "The question is what we do with it." "You take it public," Sienna said without hesitation. "This isn't just about your family drama anymore. Leo's theft has real victims. Kids who didn't get educational resources, families who didn't receive housing assistance, small businesses that couldn't get the loans they were promised." Theo nodded. "Your grandfather trusted you with this for a reason, man. He knew you'd do the right thing." I looked around the table at these 3 people who barely knew each other but had come together to help me uncover the truth. Naomi, the lawyer who could have taken any high-paying corporate job but chose to serve community organizations. Sienna, the journalist who spent her days exposing corruption instead of writing puff pieces for easy money. Theo, the poet who worked at a bookstore because he believed literature could change the world. "There's a Reyes Holdings shareholder meeting next week," I said slowly. Leo's supposed to present the annual Community Impact Report. Sienna's eyes lit up. Perfect timing for a surprise guest speaker. The Reyes Holdings boardroom occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city and sound. I'd never been here before. The family business had always been my father and Leo's domain, but I tried to project confidence as I walked past the surprised receptionist. "Excuse me, sir, the meeting is for shareholders and board members only," she called after me. "I'm Julian Reyes," I said, not breaking stride. "I think that qualifies." The boardroom fell silent as I entered. My father sat at the head of a massive conference table, flanked by men and women in expensive suits who managed pension funds and investment portfolios. Leo stood at the front of the room, mid-presentation, his face cycling through confusion, annoyance, and something that looked like panic. "Julian," my father said, his voice carefully controlled, "this is unexpected." "I apologize for the interruption," I said, moving to an empty chair at the far end of the table. "I thought the shareholders should hear about Project Lantern before Leo finishes his community impact presentation." Leo's PowerPoint slide showed photographs of smiling children and families, overlaid with statistics about Reyes Holdings' charitable contributions. "Jules, maybe we could discuss this after the meeting." "No, I think we should discuss it now." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "Mr. Chen, as chairman of the Pension Fund Board, you might be interested to know that the $50,000 Reyes Holdings claimed to donate to the Beacon Children's Foundation last year never reached any children, because the Beacon Children's Foundation doesn't exist." A murmur rippled around the table. Leo's confident demeanor began to crack. "Julian, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've discovered that you've stolen over $7 million from this company over the past 5 years, I said, standing up. Money that was supposed to fund education programs, housing initiatives, and small business loans. Money that you diverted to shell companies, used to buy personal real estate, and spent on political donations to advance your own career. The room erupted. Board members demanded to see evidence. My father called for order. Leo's face had gone pale, his hands shaking as he gripped his presentation remote. "This is insane," Leo said, his voice rising. "Julian's always been jealous of my success. He's making wild accusations because he couldn't handle being left out of the will." "The Emerald Coast Vineyard," I continued, ignoring his protests, "purchased for $1.2 million with money diverted from the Washington Education Initiative. The Pacific Northwest Development Company, which you own through a shell corporation, has received over $3 million in quote-quote consulting fees from Reyes Holdings." "Consulting for what, Leo? What services did you provide to justify $3 million? Quote. Naomi entered the boardroom at that moment, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent years preparing for this confrontation. "Ms. Glass," my father said, recognition dawning in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Representing the estate of Santiago Reyes in the interests of Project Lantern Foundation," she said, placing legal documents on the table. "I'm here to serve notice of a formal audit request and to present evidence of financial malfeasance that requires immediate board attention." She began distributing copies of the evidence we'd compiled, bank records, forged documents, correspondence between Santiago and regulatory agencies that had been ignored. The board members studied the papers in stunned silence. "Mr. Reyes," said Margaret Chen, the pension fund representative, "are these allegations accurate?" Leo looked around the room like a cornered animal. Even if there were some accounting irregularities, they were made in the company's best interest. Strategic investments, I interrupted. "You bought a vineyard with money meant for kids' computer labs. You paid for campaign donations with funds allocated for immigrant family housing assistance. You stole from the most vulnerable people in our community to maintain your lifestyle. I built this company into what it is today," Leo shouted, his composure finally collapsing. "I brought in the clients. I managed the investments. I made the hard decisions while you were playing with books and pretending to be an artist. You think you can just walk in here and destroy everything I've worked for?" "You destroyed it yourself," I said quietly. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." My mother had been silent through the entire confrontation, but now she rose from her chair, her face a mask of cold fury. "Julian, you've always been determined to embarrass this family. Congratulations, you've succeeded." She left the room without another word. My father remained seated, staring at the documents as if they might spontaneously combust and solve his problems. "The board will need time to review this evidence," Margaret Chen said, her voice professional but shaken. "In the meantime, I move that Leo Reyes be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." The motion carried unanimously. The story broke in the Seattle Business Journal 3 days later, with follow-up coverage in the Times and Post-Intelligencer. "Hedge fund heir accused of charity fraud," read one headline. "Millions missing from Seattle investment firm," read another. I'd been staying at Theo's apartment, trying to avoid the reporters who'd discovered my address and the family members who alternated between fury and demands that I fix this mess. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, legal questions, and increasingly desperate messages from Leo. "The internet is having a field day with this," Theo said, scrolling through social media on his laptop. "Someone started a hashtag called #BookstoreJustice. There's a whole thread of people sharing stories about getting screwed over by rich kids who face no consequences." Sienna's investigative piece had been picked up by national outlets. Her article, "The Quiet Thief: How One Man Stole Millions from Children's Charities While His Family Looked the Other Way," had garnered hundreds of thousands of shares and sparked conversations about accountability in family-owned businesses. "Julian?" Naomi's voice came through my phone with news that made my stomach clench. "Your father wants to meet, tonight. He says it's important." The restaurant Tomas chose was quiet and expensive, the kind of place where conversations happened in hushed tones and privacy was guaranteed. He looked older than I remembered, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. "I've retained criminal defense attorneys for Leo," he said without preamble. "The best in the city. They think they can minimize the charges, maybe negotiate a plea deal." "Dad, I need you to back down, Julian. Withdraw the evidence. Claim it was a misunderstanding. Help us control the narrative." His eyes met mine across the table. "In exchange, I'll set up a trust fund for you. $2 million. Enough for you to write your novels, travel, live comfortably without working." I stared at him, this man who'd spent my entire life treating me like a disappointment, now offering to buy my silence. "You want me to let Leo get away with stealing from children's programs so he can avoid prison? I want you to think about the family's reputation, about the employees who work for Reyes Holdings, the clients who trust us with their investments. Leo made mistakes, but destroying him won't bring back the money he took." "The money he stole," I corrected, "and it might not bring it back, but it might prevent him from stealing more." Tomas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Julian, you've never understood how the world works. Sometimes good people have to make compromises to protect the greater good. Leo's learned his lesson. He won't do this again." I thought about Silas at the community center, about the kids learning to code on donated computers, about Santiago's vision of quiet revolution through consistent care. "Dad, what if I told you I inherited $4.8 million from grandfather? What if I told you I'm running his foundation now, and I have the resources to rebuild everything Leo destroyed?" His face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, something that might have been pride. "Santiago left you money?" "He left me a mission. The same mission he tried to share with you, but you wouldn't listen." I stood up, leaving my untouched dinner on the table. "Leo's not going to learn his lesson, Dad. Men like him never do. They just get better at not getting caught." I walked away from my father sitting alone in that expensive restaurant, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about disappointing him. The Lantern Foundation's community meeting took place in a renovated warehouse in Georgetown, its brick walls decorated with murals painted by local artists. I stood at a podium facing a crowd of about 50 people. Community organizers, small business owners, students, families who'd benefited from Santiago's programs. "My grandfather used to say that the best legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you lift up," I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Santiago Reyes believed that real wealth comes from investing in people's potential, not from accumulating assets. Silas Chen sat in the front row, nodding encouragement. Behind him were faces I was beginning to recognize. Maria, who'd started a catering business with a microloan from the foundation. David, a teenager who'd learned programming at the community center and was now heading to UW on a scholarship. Mrs. Nguyen, whose citizenship ceremony Santiago had personally attended last year. Over the past month, you've probably read about my family in the news. About money that was stolen, trust that was broken, institutions that failed the people they were supposed to serve. I paused, looking out at these faces that represented Santiago's true legacy. But what you might not know is that my grandfather spent 15 years quietly building something better. Something that belongs to all of us. Quote, I talked about the expanded programs Project Lantern would fund, coding boot camps for displaced workers, legal aid clinics for immigrant families, community gardens that would provide fresh food and job training. I talked about Santiago's vision of revolution through radical kindness, of change that happened one family, one opportunity, one act of care at a time. I'm not a businessman like my father or my brother, I said. I'm a guy who works at a bookstore and writes stories that nobody reads. But my grandfather saw something in me that I'm still learning to see in myself. He trusted me with his life's work because he believed I understood that the point isn't to be important, it's to be useful. After the formal presentation, I walked through the room talking with community members about their ideas and needs. Theo performed a poem he'd written about the power of inherited responsibility. Sienna interviewed several families about how Santiago's programs had impacted their lives. Julian, Silas said, approaching me near the end of the evening, there's something I want to show you. He led me to a wall I hadn't noticed earlier, covered with photographs of community members at graduations, job interviews, citizenship ceremonies, and small business openings. In the center was a picture of Santiago at what looked like a children's art class, his sleeves rolled up, paint on his hands, surrounded by kids holding up their creations. He never wanted to be in the photographs, Silas said. We had to sneak this one, but we wanted people to remember that he was here, that he was part of their stories. I studied the image, Santiago's genuine smile, the way the children leaned toward him, the paint-covered table that spoke of work being done rather than appearances being maintained. This was the man my family had dismissed as eccentric, unsuccessful, a dreamer who wasted his potential. Silas, I said, I want you to be the Foundation's community director, full salary, full benefits, decision-making authority for all local programs. His eyes widened. Julian, I don't have a business degree or nonprofit experience. You have something better. You have the trust of this community and the vision to see what it could become. I gestured around the room, where people were still talking in small groups, sharing ideas and making connections. My grandfather chose you to run this place for a reason. I'm just making it official. Quote. Later that evening, Sienna and I walked along the waterfront, Seattle's lights reflecting off Elliott Bay. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and full of possibility. So what happens now? She asked. You've exposed Leo, saved the Foundation, found your purpose. What's next for Julian Reyes? I thought about the question, about the life that was opening up before me like pages in an unwritten book. I keep doing the work. Build the program Santiago envisioned. Try to be useful. And Leo, your family? Leo's going to face consequences for the first time in his life. My parents will probably never forgive me for embarrassing them. But maybe that's okay. Maybe some things are more important than family approval. She slipped her hand into mine as we walked, a gesture that felt both new and inevitable. Your grandfather would be proud of you. I hope so, I said. I'm still learning how to be proud of myself. The cafe Leo chose was small and quiet, tucked away in Fremont where nobody would recognize us. I arrived first, ordering coffee and taking a table by the window where I could watch the rain trace patterns on the glass. When Leo walked in, he looked different. His usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, the confident posture I'd known my entire life replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been shouting or hadn't slept in days. "What do you want, Leo?" He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. "The district attorney offered me a plea deal. Plead guilty to embezzlement and fraud. Serve 18 months in minimum security. Pay full restitution plus penalties. My lawyers think it's the best I'm going to get." I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to be struggling with words. 18 months, he repeated. "Do you know what happens to someone like me in prison, Julian? Even minimum security? I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation, my fiancé, everything I've worked for." "Everything you stole for," I corrected. His jaw tightened. "Right, everything I stole for. Happy now?" "I'm not happy about any of this, Leo. I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted to stop you from destroying other people." "Other people?" He laughed bitterly. "You always were naive, Jules. You think those community programs actually matter. You think giving some immigrant kid a computer class is going to change the world. The system is rigged from the ground up. I was just smart enough to play by the real rules instead of pretending the fake ones matter." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw someone I barely recognized. The golden child who'd been everyone's pride and joy had become hollow, eaten away by his own cynicism and entitlement. "Leo, do you remember when we were kids and you helped me build that treehouse in the backyard? You spent weeks measuring boards and teaching me how to use Dad's tools. You said we were going to have the best fort in the neighborhood. What's your point?" "My point is that you used to care about building things instead of just taking them. What happened to you?" For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw something raw and desperate underneath. "What happened to me? I grew up, Julian. I realized that nice guys finish last, that being good doesn't get you anywhere, that the world rewards people who are willing to do whatever it takes to win. Santiago was good. He finished first in the ways that actually matter. Santiago was a fool who gave away a fortune so people could feel better about their pathetic lives." Leo's voice rose, drawing glances from other customers. "He could have been influential, powerful, respected. Instead, he wasted his potential on charity cases who would have failed anyway." I stood up, suddenly unable to sit across from him any longer. "Those charity cases have names, Leo. Families, dreams, potential that Santiago helped them realize. He didn't waste his potential, he multiplied it." "So what now?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. "You've won. You got grandfather's money. You exposed my crimes. You're the hero of your own little story. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to take responsibility for what you did. Not because a judge is making you. Not because it's part of a plea bargain. But because the people you stole from deserve to hear you acknowledge the harm you caused." He stared at me for a long moment, and for a second I thought he might actually understand what I was asking of him. But then his expression hardened again. "Go to hell, Julian. You think you're better than me because you work at a bookstore and live like a monk. You're still the same loser you always were. The only difference is now you have grandfather's money to make you feel important." Quote. He stood up abruptly, throwing a $20 bill on the table. "Enjoy your moral victory, little brother. I hope it keeps you warm at night." I watched him walk away through the rain, his shoulders hunched against the weather and whatever weight he carried. We'd been strangers pretending to be brothers for most of our lives, but now even the pretense was gone. I sat alone in the cafe for another hour, watching the rain and thinking about the different paths people choose when they're faced with their own limitations. Leo had chosen to take what he couldn't earn, to steal what he couldn't build. I was trying to choose differently. 6 months later, I was unpacking boxes in a small apartment above a used bookstore in the International District, close enough to the community center that I could walk to work every morning. The space was modest. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, windows that looked out on the alley where kids played soccer after school, but it felt like home in a way the Reyes family mansion never had. Rain drummed against the windows as I arranged Santiago's books on shelves I'd built myself, his worn copies of Garcia Marquez and Neruda, finding their place next to my own collection of dog-eared novels and poetry chapbooks. His wristwatch sat on my desk, its face catching the light from the desk lamp where I wrote every morning before heading to the foundation. The doorbell rang, and I found Sienna on the narrow staircase leading up to my apartment, shaking rain from her jacket and carrying a bottle of wine. "Housewarming gift," she said, kissing me before I could take her coat. "How does it feel to be officially moved in?" "Like I'm finally living in my own life instead of someone else's," I said, leading her to the small kitchen where I'd been making dinner. "Simple, but mine." She looked around the apartment with the eye of someone who understood that sometimes the best spaces are the ones that don't try to impress anyone. "It's perfect, Julian. Very you." Through the window we could see the lights of the community center where Silas was hosting a poetry night for local teenagers. Theo was probably there, helping kids find their voices through verse and metaphor. Maria was catering the event with food from her expanding restaurant. Mrs. Nguyen was volunteering as an ESL tutor, helping new immigrants navigate the language that would become their bridge to possibility. "Any word from your family?" Sienna asked as we sat down to eat. "Mom sent a card when I moved, very formal, like she was writing to a distant acquaintance. Dad's been calling, but I haven't been ready to talk yet." I paused, considering how much had changed. "Leo started his sentence last month. Minimum security in Oregon. He'll probably serve 12 months with good behavior. Do you think about visiting him?" I considered the question, watching the rain create rivulets down the window. "Sometimes. But I think we both need time to figure out who we are, without the weight of family expectations pressing down on us." Sienna reached across the small table to squeeze my hand. "You've come so far from the guy who was hiding in the corner at that birthday party." "I'm still that guy sometimes, still the bookstore clerk who writes stories nobody reads. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being ordinary in the right ways is better than being extraordinary in the wrong ones." After dinner, we walked to the community center where the poetry night was in full swing. Theo stood at a makeshift podium, introducing a 16-year-old girl named Rosa, who was sharing verses about her family's journey from El Salvador. Her words painted pictures of hope and hardship, of dreams carried across borders in the hearts of people brave enough to start over. "That's what Santiago understood," I whispered to Sienna as we listened, "that the real revolution happens in moments like this, when someone finds their voice or learns a skill or just realizes they matter to somebody." In the back of the room, I noticed a new mural taking shape on the wall, a collaborative piece being painted by kids from the after-school program. At its center was a portrait of Santiago, but not the way my family would have painted him. This version showed him with paint on his hands, surrounded by the community he'd helped build, his eyes crinkled with the kind of joy that comes from being useful rather than important. "Julian," Silas approached us during a break between poems, "there's something I want to show you." He led us to a display case near the mural, where Santiago's wristwatch now resided alongside photographs and mementos from community members whose lives he'd touched. A small placard read, "Santiago Reyes, builder of dreams, planter of seeds, friend to all who dared to hope." "We wanted to create a memorial that matched who he really was," Silas explained. "Not the eccentric old man your family saw, but the revolutionary who believed in the power of quiet kindness." I stared at the watch, the only thing from my grandfather that my parents had bothered to leave me, now displayed as a symbol of everything I was still learning to understand about legacy and worth. "He'd love this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He never wanted to be remembered as a saint or a hero, just as someone who showed up and did the work. Later that night, as Sienna and I walked back to my apartment through the gentle Seattle rain, I pulled out my phone and began typing an email I'd been composing in my head for months. "Dear Grandfather, it's been a year since you died, and I'm finally starting to understand what you were trying to teach me. Not through your words, you were never much for speeches, but through your example. You showed me that revolution doesn't require grand gestures or public acclaim. Sometimes it just requires showing up, day after day, and choosing to care about people that others have forgotten. I'm running your foundation now, and I think you'd approve of what we're building. Silas expanded the job training program, and we've placed 43 people in good employment this year. Maria's restaurant is thriving, and she's hired 6 other immigrants from the community. The kids in Rosa's poetry workshop are preparing to publish their first chapbook. I still work at the bookstore 3 days a week because I like the rhythm of it, the way stories find their way to the right people at the right time. I'm still writing, though now my stories feel more honest, more connected to the world beyond my own imagination. Leo will be getting out of prison in a few months. I don't know if we'll ever be brothers in any real sense, but I've stopped carrying anger about it. Some people choose to build, others choose to take. I've learned which kind of person I want to be. I love you. I miss our Sunday morning walks, and your terrible coffee, and the way you listen to people like their stories mattered. Because they did matter. Because they do. Your grandson, Julian. I saved the email as a draft, knowing I'd never send it, but needing to write the words anyway. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have, with ghosts, with memory, with the parts of people that live on, in the choices we make after they're gone. The rain continued to fall on Seattle, on the community center where dreams were being planted and tended, on the small apartment where I was learning to build a life that felt like mine. In the distance, the lights of downtown gleamed like promises, like possibilities, like lanterns in the dark guiding people home. Santiago had been right about legacy. It wasn't what you accumulated or inherited or left behind in legal documents. It was what you lifted up, what you made possible, what continued to grow long after you were gone. It was the quiet revolution of caring about each other, one story at a time, one opportunity at a time, one act of radical kindness at a time. I was finally ready to carry that torch, to be useful rather than important, to build something that mattered more than my own comfort or recognition. The bookstore clerk had found his purpose, and it felt like coming home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.